Welcome! He's the mad doctor of disaster and destruction, the one and only Dr. Adega Outlaw! Light the fires, Valhalla, for Stone Cold Loki! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seven Kinds of Mischief! I tell you what, that number gets old.
Never get old.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Seven Kinds of Mischief. I'm your host, Stone Loki, and with me today, of course, is the Mad Doctor. How he got that name, we will never know, because he's never really angry unless you really make him angry. Dr. Adega Outlaw, how are you doing, brother?
I'm doing really good. I just heard some good news a few minutes ago, so I'm doing really good. I like always
All
hearing
right.
good news.
Heck yeah.
But no, it's been fun. I enjoy watching good things happen, and I'm seeing a lot of good things happen. Amidst all the turmoil and all the bad news, yeah, I'm not doing scary time tonight. I'm doing very hopeful, happy time tonight.
Oh, my.
Yes. Yes.
You must be in a really, really good mood.
Kind of.
Day Bob, how are you doing? Good evening, Day Bob. Of course, our guardian of the void, Lady Mist, is here. Good evening, Lady Mist. Psychodorf 9. Oh, did I not say it right? Psychodorf 9. Yes. Holy shit. Chris Persia, the wrench of wrenches, is here. The wrench of the north. Michael Gonzalez, good evening, my friend. How are you? It is good to see you. Phantom Outsider is here. What is up, Phantom Outsider? Claude Sailing. How are you doing, Claude Sailing? Akimi Mara is here. What is up, Akimi? How are you doing? I hope you were doing well. Light the fires, Akimi. She's killing it. So,
Leah Rose, Claude Sailing, Phantom Outsider. You said that. Well, welcome everybody, and hello to everyone.
Leah Rose. Good evening, Leah Rose. So many awesome people here. Thank you so very much for being here and hanging out with me and Adega. So I've got a picture. Let me, because it's like, oh, it's a small picture and I got to change the way it, before I bring this up for you. It's the one picture you sent me.
Yeah, that'll come up in a minute. You can show it anytime you want. It doesn't matter. What I'm doing tonight, I had been talking, my son's back. He was gone for a couple of years doing some service stuff. And so we were talking, and I've always got all these ideas, and you guys have heard me, those of you who have been here for the past couple of years where we've done this show, you've heard all kinds of things come from me. And maybe I might repeat just a little bit tonight. And I've thought about going back and doing some of the old stuff with new information. But, he was kind of dumbfounded as to what he would consider something good to hear, what might be interesting. And a thought came to me. Some of you know that I've written for Top Fives, the YouTube channel that got, 5+ million or what have you. Or is it 4 million? I can't remember. and because they like the way I write. And Loki talked nice things about me this morning, and it was one of those mornings where I just wasn't moving very well, so I wasn't in chat. But um, top fives liked the way I wrote, and they wanted me to write for them, so I've done that. And this one article hasn't been aired, and I already had discussed with them about sharing some of their stuff. And I said I could use whatever I wanted. But since this stuff hasn't aired, I'm going to modify it. But this is an article I wrote for them. And the original premise was, and since they mostly do spooky stuff, it may be they're saving it for a special occasion, or maybe it may not come out at all. I don't know. Um, but the original premise they presented me was to talk about human evolutionary failures, because they know I'm a doc. And I thought about it, and you know, 80 years ago, 70 years ago, there was a lot of things that they thought were evolutionary failures, and some people still believe them. But the more we've studied, the more we found out that it isn't the case. Everything in the human body is amazing. Because they'd say things like appendix or redundancy things or the lizard brain, or it just, no, they all work phenomenal. So what I wanted to do tonight is read parts of it. I'm going to read the introduction and then two of the five that I presented to them. Again, my contact with the company absolutely loved it. And again, they paid me for it, but it hasn't been presented yet. So this is not about evolutionary fails at all. This is about the successes of humans. And I won't be able to see chat. And yes, these are my own words. So if I fumble and goof up, it is because I am being a lousy reader and my Red Bull hasn't kicked in. So forgive me, but these are my own words. All right, here we go. Over the past 30 years, discoveries and advancements in knowledge of the human body and mind have been so unusually fantastic that many are hard to believe, leaving the researchers in awe and almost disbelief. Organs like the appendix, glands like the pineal and thymus, and mental impulses on a quantum level keep revealing just how amazing human life is or could be. The articles, research papers, and journals on these subjects are numerous and constantly changing. Any of the curious need only look through publications at PubMed, New England Journal of Medicine, Biomed Research International, or JMPT. The following examples are taken from these sources, except for, I didn't put this in there, but there's one, a couple that are actually from my own sources, but they're backed up. Uh, the absolute flood of information continues, and the understanding of what it means to be human oftentimes seems out of reach. Old ideas like the lack of need of the evolutionary leftovers, such as the appendix, are ending up being abandoned as we discover just how much we really don't know or can comprehend. Our limitations in understanding who we are had been held to things like microscopic strength, length, and diverse enough sample sizes, genetic profiles, and newer and better diagnostic tools to see deeper within more accuracy. With each new tool and precise observation, the library of knowledge about what it is to be a healthy human grows exponentially. Most researchers agree we have only scratched the surface of all the things yet to be discovered in the human body. Let's see, do I want to do number one or number five? We'll skip five, do number four. Since the beginning of our recorded history, stories of magic and superhuman acts, of mental persuasions on the world around us have abounded. Nearly every religious text, legends, and oral history have some form of supernatural event or events within them. And those of you who have read evolution can see why I brought this topic up, because it kind of hits home. In more modern times, the advancement of chemistry and the use of technological trickery, um, more types of supernatural claims appear. Things like bending spoons, levitating objects, and starting fires have all surfaced to fool the observers into believing in some extraordinary powers are at work. There are, however, some that remain unexplained by all credible observations and scrutiny. This guy has a nickname, but his real name is Chai Kung, is one of these, with a myriad of pretenders who claim the ability to heal, manipulate energies such as gravity, or even start fires, are nearly all tricks. On rare occasions, such as with Dynamo Jack, and you guys could look him up, he's pretty cool. His ability to start fires and force energies has never been explained. Then there are those with mental abilities that can't be reproduced in many cases. These abilities uh, can be reproduced in many cases. These abilities can be reproduced, measured, and quantified, but can only be attributed to mental abilities or energy of the human participant. A common experiment, and this is one where um, I've talked about this before, because you guys know that I much prefer to be a positive person, and I'm going to just basically surmise the next few chapters. But we talked a year and a half ago about an experiment where if you put cooked rice in a jar, and all you would do was put your intended word on it, an intent like hate or happiness, love or anger. You put those on those jars, and the ones with the negative connotating words, that rice would rot very fast, where the other ones would last much longer. And it's something you could reproduce on a reliable basis. It always works. Um, let's see. There's a connection of sorts to quantum mechanics. Many of you know that quantum theory has three main properties used to define things, like how a particle looks, acts, or moves. Light is given classification as having both wave and particle properties, and matter can behave like a wave. These things leave us still puzzled as to how things precisely behave and why. However, one thing is for sure: observational effects, observation affects reality. In a famous study done by the Weizmann Institute, electrons were found to behave more like waves and less than when they were observed, and more like particles the more intense the observation. Okay, so waves when you don't watch, particles when you do watch. Uh, some of you probably seen that study where they'll have receiving plates and they eject photons without anyone watching, and it makes a certain pattern through those receiving plates. And then the more, like, you could put a camera in the room and it would change the pattern. Just the simple fact that there was a camera with someone's intent to watch, where you had direct observation, and it would completely change the pattern. But it's all real, and no one knows why. Here's number three. Previously and this is where that picture will come in. Previously in all health studies, the assumption was given that human was the most susceptible and weakest of all creatures in order to ensure the safety of the end development when it comes to treatment for any disorder. These ensure that whatever procedure or medication that results from these studies is as safe and general for the general population as possible. Recent years and developments have moved us away from these paradigms. You guys know that with all the recent sicknesses and things, they don't assume anything. We are the guinea pigs. However, some interesting things resulted from those old patterns. In fact, there have been examples where the human proves to be one of the most powerful creatures on the planet. The following examples are real and documented, though hid for reasons that will become obvious. These accounts are taken from the author's personal study and one actual event that was a part of. That he, meaning me. In the late 70s, a girl whom we will call Jane Doe, to protect the patient's records and identity, had some birth trauma that led to a condition known as hydrocephalus. And you guys have probably seen, or at least seen pictures of, someone with that. This is a condition that is characterized by having too much fluid on or around the brain for one reason or another. In many cases, there are visible deformities of the skull and brain damage in varying degrees. In the case of Jane Doe, there were no issues. Years later, after puberty, a CAT scan was performed of her, and the CAT scan was for something else. It was like a sports injury. They had no idea. of her skull that looks similar to the image that you're looking at now. The actual images are withheld to protect the woman's identity. What has become the subject of deep fascination among many who study neurology is that, for all intents and purposes, this woman has no deficits whatsoever. She has a normal IQ. There are no physical limitations and appears in every way to be an absolutely normal woman, though she is functioning on less than 20% of available brain tissue. This would almost seem impossible. And yet, I've seen this woman move about, talk, and perform, and you would never, ever know. And her brain scan looks very similar to this, except one side of the one hemisphere is a little less than the other. And she has functioning of both sides without any issue. It's really quite amazing. Here's another one. This one is true too, but a lot of people don't want you to know about this. It's very bizarre, hard to believe. In an earlier and less well documented case comes from India. Incredible evidence shows that this was an actual case, but much of the documentation has been lost under dubious circumstances. In this case, a man in the mid last century lived and worked in a poorer part of India where he lost most of his forearm in an accident. The astonishing thing for this man was that his forearm actually regenerated to a nearly normal reproduction of the original. Medical science was dumbfounded as to why this could have happened when there have been no other cases so recorded. Some speculated that it was a hoax, though there was enough evidence at the time to prove otherwise. Others say that because this man had no access to medical treatment, his wound was left to heal without normal sterilization or the remaining part of the limb or extended use of a tourniquet. The belief being that this allowed the cells at the very site of the injury to remain alive enough to heal in such a way as to regrow much of his forearm and hand. I can't see what's Dave. Yeah, that happens a lot. Um, okay, this is one of the big ones for my life. This is a very personal story. I could pinpoint to you because uh, the story of this man's life is it was very popular at the time, and I was fortunate enough to be involved in it. Um, Actually, I was the treating physician. A young patient contacted the doctor for care of a near complete severing of the spinal cord in the neck, along with multiple fractures. The exact location was the C5, C6 vertebral level, with most of the posterior aspect of the spinal cord suffering the traumatic separation, meaning his spinal cord was separated, all except for a sliver. The patient was a quadriplegic, having only slight use of two fingers of the right hand. Bowel and bladder functions were non existent, having to rely upon external catch bags that were affixed externally to the abdomen. The patient was alert and could talk without issue, but the debilitating case at the later teen years had led to deep emotional frustrations. However, this patient had hope in abundance. To give you a story, some of you may have heard me talk about this, but um, I was a student, and at the time when you're a graduate, you want to see as many patients as possible. You just take whoever you can. Um, and I got a call from this kid, and he says, "Yeah, I hear you're a chiropractor. Can you help me?" And my first response is, "Yeah," because he called me at home, and I said, "Yeah, of course I can help you." And he says, "Well, maybe you heard of me." And he explained how I could have heard of him, and he was on TV and all of this stuff. And I thought, uh, yeah. To give you a hint, William Shatner narrated this kid's story. Um, and he says, "I'm a quadriplegic. Can you help me?" And I just needed to see people, to be honest with you. I said, "Sure, I could." And I could read the story or I could tell it to you from my own words. I think I will tell it to you from my own words. So he comes in, and when you're a student, you have a supervising doctor that watches over everything that you do early on, and then they kind of supervise a little less as you get more sophisticated skills. And so they were watching me, and this kid came in, and they said, "Why'd you bring this kid in? There's nothing we could do for him." And I said, "You know what? He wants to try. Let's try." And I did all the tests. He was numb, absolutely numb. He couldn't even feel his fingers that he could barely move to operate a wheelchair with two fingers to get the thing to move. Bright kid, very happy, um, and very hopeful. So I did things different for him than I would a normal patient. 6 months later, he came in and he was done. He had gone to PT, and he says, "I walked for 50 feet today, and they removed the bowel and bladder bag." He had use of his body, and he was on his way to being normal with a nearly complete severed spinal cord. The same thing that you've seen that happened to Christopher Reeves. After that, when I was at school, they sent me all the difficult cases, and I was no longer supervised by a staff doctor. I was very fortunate, but call it a miracle, which it partly was. Call it us completely underestimating what the human body can do, which a lot of it was. And call it some of my skill, maybe. But it was evidence to me that we have absolutely no idea how advanced we could be if we knew who we are, and what our bodies could do. Part two is a story about various different, three different men that I gave stories of. We're going to skip that one. They're very cool stories. So if Top Fives releases it, I'm sure you'll get a kick out of it because they're fantastic. I love each one of them. But we're going to go to the last part. This is number 5. This last example of our type 5s comes to us from research over years in governments and colleges around the world. And some of you heard me hint about this, but this is written down. I'm not going to read it the way I wrote it. Something has been discovered that is nearly unbelievable and the stuff of science fiction, and yet it has been proven over and over again. The sad thing about it is, most people don't even know about it. If everyone had, things might be considerably better in our world. This was in the latter part of the 90s, a study done with the help of some volunteers and in remote locations. Since this study, several have followed investigation with individual aspects of this marvelous ability of humans. In the study, 2 individuals at a time were placed on opposite sides of the United States in isolated rooms that allowed no external influences other than devices meant to measure the responses of the individuals being studied. One of the individuals was given a series of images to look at. These images were meant to elicit emotions. Pictures of flowers, children at play, and beautiful scenery were given. Also given were images of painful scenes, sad scenes, and things that would horrify. The subjects were monitored to see how their physiology responded and reacted to each other's type of image, or reacted to each type of image. On the other side of the continent, the subject was placed in an identical room with identical monitoring equipment. The difference is that this subject was simple. The difference in this subject was simple. They were asked to only think of the other person participating in the study on the other side of the country. No other objective was required. In these studies, as these studies progressed, something amazing was discovered and repeatable. There were at times highly accurate and duplicated physiological responses by the person not being shown any images, just to think on the other person. This subject had reacted physically to the images of beauty and horror, just like the person who had actually been shown these images. What was then discovered, being even more astonishing, was that the second subject was occasionally reacting to an image being shown to their counterpart fractions of a second before the image was even revealed. These studies have continued and have demonstrated some of the most wonderful things about being human. One is that we, on some quantum level, are all connected. Our emotional makeup is influencing and influenced by each other. We are all bound by some unseen force that affects the general mood of the world. The other magnificent discovery is that, to some degree, we all have precognitive ability, or in other words, we can sense things a fraction of a second before they actually happen. Think of intuition, or that quick flash of a sense of urgency that we all experience from time to time. We all have it, but have not been honed or developed in the ability due to the troubles and the needs of the day to day. It is there, dormant and waiting. The big picture is in this episode that we, as humans, are far greater than we allow ourselves to be or even believe. May we all take the time to think of each other in better terms, more magical and wonderful, and by so doing, create a better world. And that was a pending article, parts of it anyway.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Mad Dr. Adega Outlaw. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So, the story we have tonight is one you may recognize. It's something that might feel a little familiar, so I'm not going to bother with the title. We're just going to jump right into it.
There we go.
Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the sky, a queen sat at a window sewing. And the frame of the window was made of black ebony. And while she was sewing and looking out of the window at the snow, she pricked her finger with the needle. 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow, and the red looked pretty upon the white snow. And she thought to herself, if only I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame. Soon after that, she did have a child, a little daughter, who was as white as snow and as red as blood, and her hair was black as ebony. And she was therefore called Little Snow White. And when the child was born, the queen had died. After a year had passed, the king took another wife. She was beautiful, but proud and haughty. And she could not bear that anyone else should ever surpass her in beauty. She had a wonderful looking glass. And when she stood in front of it and looked at it herself in it, she said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of them all? And the looking glass answered, you, O queen, are the fairest of all. Then she was satisfied, for she knew that the looking glass spoke the truth. But Snow White was growing up and grew more and more beautiful every day. And when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as the day and more beautiful than the queen herself. And once when the queen asked her looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of them all? It answered, you are fairer than all who are here, Lady Queen, but more beautiful still is Snow White as I ween. Then the queen was shocked and turned yellow and green with envy. From that time, whenever she looked at Snow White, her heart heaved in her breast and she hated the girl. Envy and pride grew higher and higher in her heart like a weed, so that she had no peace day or night. She called a hunter and said, take the child away into the forest. I will no longer have her in my sight. Kill her and bring me back her heart as a token. The hunter obeyed and took her away, but when he had drawn his knife and was about to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep and said, Ah, dear hunter, spare me my life. I will run away into the wild forest and never come home again. And as she was so beautiful, the hunter had pity on her and said, "Run away, poor child, run away. The wild beasts will soon devour you," he thought. And yet it seemed as if a stone had been rolled from his heart, since he no longer needed to kill her. And as a young boar just then came running by, he stabbed it and cut out its heart and took it to the queen as proof that the child was dead. The cook had to salt this, and the wicked queen ate it and thought she had eaten the heart of Snow White. Ain't that something? She ate Snow White's heart. The things we find out in the OG editions.
Grim Tales, yep. He did it right. Or they did.
But now the poor child was all alone in the great forest, and so terrified that she looked at every leaf of every tree and did not know what to do. Then she began to run and ran over sharp stones and through thorns, and the wild beasts ran past her, but did her no harm. She ran as far as her feet would go until it was almost evening. Then she saw a little cottage and went into it to rest. Everything in the cottage was small, but neater and cleaner than you can imagine. There was a table on which was a white cover and 7 little plates, and on each plate a little spoon. Moreover, there were 7 little knives and forks and 7 little mugs. Against the wall stood 7 little beds side by side and covered with snow white bedspreads. Little Snow White was so hungry and thirsty that she ate some vegetables and bread from each plate and drank a drop of wine out of each mug, for she did not wish to take all from only one. Then, as she was so tired, she laid herself down on each of the little beds, but none of them suited her. One was too long, another too short, but at last she found that the seventh one was just right. And so she remained in it, said a prayer, and went to sleep. When it was quite dark, the owners of the cottage came back. They were 7 dwarfs who dug and delved in the mountains for ore. They lit their 7 candles, and now that the cottage was lit, they saw that someone had been there, for everything was not in the same order in which they had left it. The first said, "Who has been sitting in my chair?" The second, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third, "Who has been taking my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been eating my vegetables?" The fifth, "Who has been using my fork?" The sixth, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" And the seventh, "Who has been drinking out of my mug?" Then the first looked round and saw that there was a little hole on his bed, and he said, "Who's been getting into my bed?" The others came up and each called out, "Somebody has been lying in my bed too." But the seventh, when he looked at his bed, saw little Snow White, who was lying asleep in it. And he called the others, who came running up, and they cried with astonishment and brought their 7 little candles and let the light fall on little Snow White. "Oh heavens!" cried they. "What a lovely child!" And they were so glad that they did not wake her up, but let her sleep in the bed. And the 7th dwarf slept with his companions 1 hour with each, and so got through the night. When it was morning, little Snow White awoke and was frightened when she saw the 7 dwarfs. They were friendly and asked her what her name was. "My name is Snow White," she answered. "How have you come to our house?" said the dwarfs. Then she told them that her stepmother had wished to have her killed, but that the hunter had spared her life, and that she had run for the whole day until at last she had found their dwelling. The dwarfs said, "If you will take care of our house, cook, make the beds, wash, sew, knit, and if you will keep everything neat and clean, you can stay with us and you shall want for nothing." "Why, yes," said Snow White, "with all of my heart." And she stayed with them. She kept the house in order. In the mornings, they went to the mountains and looked for copper and gold. And in the evenings, they came back, and then their supper had to be ready. The girl was alone the whole day, so the good dwarfs warned her and said, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon know that you are here. Be sure to let no one come in." But the queen, believing that she had eaten Snow White's heart, was certain that she was again the first and most beautiful of them all. And she went to her looking glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in the land is fairest of them all?" And the looking glass answered, "O queen, you are fairest of all I see. But over the hills where the seven dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is as fair as she." She was astounded, for she knew that the looking glass never spoke falsely, and she knew the hunter had betrayed her and that little Snow White was alive. And so she thought and thought again how she might kill her. For so long as she was not the fairest in the land, envy let her have no rest. And when she at last thought of something to do, she painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler, and no one could have known her. In this disguise, she went over the seven mountains to the seven dwarves and knocked at the door and cried, "Pretty things to sell, very cheap, very cheap." Little Snow White looked out the window and called out, "Good day, my good woman. What have you to sell?" "Good things, pretty things," she answered. "Laces of all colors," and she pulled out one which was woven of bright colored silk. "I may let the worthy old woman in," thought Snow White, and she unbolted the door and bought the pretty lace. "Child," said the old woman, "what a fright you look. Come, I will lace you properly for once." Snow White had no suspicion, but stood before her and let her be laced with the new laces. But the old woman laced so quickly and so tightly that Snow White lost her breath and fell down as if dead. "Now I'm most beautiful," said the queen to herself, and ran away. Not long afterwards, in the evening, the seven dwarfs came home, but were shocked that they saw their dear little Snow White lying on the ground, and that she neither stirred nor moved, and seemed to be dead. They lifted her up, and as they saw that she was laced too tightly, they cut the laces. Then she began to breathe, and after a while came to life again. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "The old peddler was none other than the wicked witch. Take care, and let no one come in when we are not with you." The wicked woman, when she had reached home, went in front of the glass and asked, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is fairest of them all?" And it answered, "O queen, you are the fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the seven dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is as fair as she." When she heard that, all her blood rushed to her heart with fear, for she saw plainly that little Snow White was again alive. "But now," she said, "I will think of something that shall put an end to you." And by the help of witchcraft, which she understood, she made a poisonous comb. Then she disguised herself and took the shape of another old woman. So she went over the seven mountains to the seven dwarfs, knocked at the door, and cried, "Good things to sell, cheap, cheap." Little Snow White looked out and said, "Go away. I cannot let anyone come in." "I suppose you could look," said the old woman, and pulled the poisonous comb out and helped it up. It pleased the girl so well that she let herself be fooled and opened the door. When they had struck a bargain, the old woman said, "Now I will comb your pretty hair properly for once." Poor little Snow White had no suspicion, and let the old woman do as she pleased. But hardly had she put the comb in her hair than the poison in it took effect, and the girl fell down senseless. "You paragon of beauty," said the wicked woman, "you are done." And she went away. Fortunately, however, it was almost evening, and when the seven dwarfs came home and they saw Snow White lying as if dead upon the ground, they at once suspected the wicked stepmother. And they looked around and found the poisoned comb. Scarcely had they taken it out when Snow White came to and told them what had happened. Then they warned her once more to be upon her guard and to open the door to no one. The queen, at home now, went in front of the glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of them all? O queen, you are the fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the seven dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is as fair as she. When she heard the glass speak, she trembled and shook in rage. Snow White shall die, she cried, even if it costs me my life. With that, she went into a quiet, secret, lonely room where no one ever came, and there she made a poisonous apple. Outside it looked pretty, white with a red check, so that everyone who saw it longed for it, but whoever ate a piece of it would surely die. When the apple was ready, she painted her face and dressed herself up as a country woman, and so she went over the seven mountains to the seven dwarfs. She knocked at the door, and Snow White put her head out of the window and said, I cannot let anyone in. The seven dwarfs have forbidden it. It is all the same to me, answered the woman. I shall soon get rid of my apples. Here, I shall give you one. No, said Snow White, I dare not take anything. Are you afraid? Said the old woman. Look, I will cut the apple into two pieces. You eat this part, and I will eat this. The apple was so cunningly made that only the red cheek was poisoned. Snow White longed for the fine apple, and when she saw that the woman ate part of it, she could resist no longer, and stretched out her hand and took the poisonous half. But hardly had she taken a bite when she fell down dead. Then the queen looked at her with a dreadful look and laughed aloud and said, White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony wood, this time the dwarfs cannot wake you up again. And then she asked the looking glass on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? And it answered, O queen, in this land you are the fairest of all. Then her envious heart had rest, so far as an envious heart can. The dwarves, when they came home in the evening, found Snow White lying upon the ground. She breathed no more and was dead. They lifted her up, looked to see whether they could find anything poisonous, unlaced her, combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but it was all of no use. The poor child was dead and remained dead. They laid her upon a pyre, and all seven of them sat around it and wept for her, and wept 3 long days. Then they were going to bury her, but she still looked as if she were alive, and still had her pretty red cheeks. They said, We cannot bury her in the dark ground. And they had a transparent coffin of glass made, so that she could be seen from all sides. And they laid her in it, and in golden letters wrote upon it her name, and that she was a king's daughter. Then they put the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always stayed by it and watched. And birds came too and wept for Snow White, first an owl, then a raven, and at last a dove. And now Snow White lay a long, long time in the coffin, and she did not change, but looked as if she were asleep, for she was as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair as black as ebony. It happened, however, that a king's son came into the forest and went to the dwarf's house to spend the night. He saw the coffin on the mountain and the beautiful Snow White inside it, and read what was written upon it in golden letters. He said to the dwarfs, Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you want for it. But the dwarves answered, We will not part with it for all the gold in the world. And then he said, Let me have it as a gift, for I cannot live without seeing Snow White. I will honor and prize her as my dearest possession. As he spoke in this way, the good dwarfs took pity upon him and gave him the coffin. Now the king's son had it and carried away by his servants on their shoulders. And it happened that they stumbled over a tree stump, and with the shock, the poisonous piece of apple which Snow White had bitten off came out of her throat. And before long she opened her eyes, lifted up the lid of the coffin, sat up, and was once more alive. "Oh heavens, where am I?" she cried. The king's son, full of joy, said, "You are with me," and told her what had happened and said, "I love you more than everything in the world. Come with me to my father's palace, and you shall be my wife." And Snow White was willing and went with him, and their wedding was held with great show and splendor. But Snow White's wicked stepmother was also invited to the feast. When she had dressed herself in beautiful clothes, she went before the looking glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? O queen, of all here the fairest is you, but the young queen is fairer by far, it is true. Then the wicked queen uttered a curse and was so utterly miserable, that she knew not what to do. At first, she could not go to the wedding at all, but she had no peace and must go to see the young queen. And when she went, she knew Snow White, and she stood still with rage and fear and could not move. But iron slippers had already been put upon the fire, and they were brought in with tongs and set before her. Then she was forced to put on the red hot shoes and dance until she dropped down dead. And that is the true story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Dance until you drop it.
Wow. You know what? Lady? We're gonna put some iron shoes in the fire and get them red hot and then make you wear them. Holy shit.
Much better than what we hear now.
Snow White was played by Arwen Avalon. Hey, y'all, to the dwarves. I came in and ate some of your food and drank some of your drink. I've just been sleeping in one of y'all's beds.
The chat's been killing it. I don't know if you watched or you've been reading, but gosh, some of the things that I enjoyed every bit of it. I didn't want to interrupt.
Unfortunately, I cannot read the chat as I am reading the story because I'm reading out of actual Brothers Grimm book. So
I just Project Story Time. Let's see, Michael. There's been a few of them that's just been broken. Yeah, I like that one. It's 81 million Americans.
That's right.
No, it was good. Thank you. It's always best to hear the OG.
That's right. The originals. F Disney. So we're getting out of here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very much for being here. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen to Adega and I on this Thirsty Thursday. We will, well, not Thirsty Thursday. Holy shit, Seven Kinds of Mischief. We will be back tomorrow morning for our season 3, episode 3 of Picard.
Good luck.
So, oh yeah.
Hey, Bob, I hope you can sleep.
Yeah, he'll probably watch it before. Probably watch it. I think he watched it already. So, but yeah, we'll be up at 7 a.m. watching. Good night, Picard Sex. Louis Sparrow, thank you for the heart. Lady Mist, thank you for being here. Akimi Mara, thank you so very much. Ghost Rider, what is up, brother? How you doing? Saj Melody, you go cross-eyed if you did. Holy shit, what are they talking about? Brogan Entertainment, thank you. Lady Mist, our guardian of the void, thank you so very much. She says, thank you, Loki and Adega. Thank you for being here.
We had Vinny and we had Stephen Walton, and we've had a lot of people popping in and out.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so very much. I love getting to do the show with Adega. We will be back tomorrow morning, and I'm semi-positive we'll have a Friday night show tomorrow, but I'm not 100% sure yet. So until then, take care. Be excellent to each other. Always speak friend to honor. We'll see you guys on the next 7 Kinds of Mischief. Take care, everybody.
See ya.
These videos are tremendous. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hammer that notification bell.